Hello, I'm Steve Harding, and this is a summary of a talk I gave at the Church of St John the Baptist at Melton Mowbray on Friday, the 8th of November 2024, as part of their appeal for a new community centre. And I thank Francis Levett and colleagues at the church, and indeed the Friends of the Church of St John's, for the kind invitation to talk about the Viking heritage in the Melton, Wreake Valley and Rutland areas. And thanks to their great help, the event helped to raise approaching £800 or £900 towards the appeal, and everyone seemed to enjoy the evening. The talk started at about 7:30, and we had a break in the middle when there was tea and cakes, a raffle, and a book sale, and we finished after a good half an hour of questions and discussion at about 9:30. So the title of the talk was Our Viking Heritage. The Melton, Wreake Valley and surrounding areas was heavily settled by Vikings, largely Danish Vikings over 1100 years ago. And my talk was about this heritage and what the people have left behind in terms of place names, all the BY names, for example, the extensive archaeology, including this cross at Sproston, and discoveries from metal detector enthusiasts in the area working under portable antiquity scheme, and the evidence for a possible thing site between Frisby and Rotherby, where the Vikings had their thing or assembly to discuss law and community issues. Finally, Francis has asked me to say something about DNA and what the Vikings who once lived here have bequeathed to us. This is a map of Scandinavian settlements in England and Wales from Julian Richards. Not the Blood of Vikings one, but Julian Richards, Professor of Archaeology at the University of York, with this area, the old Danelaw, and you can see Melton Mowbray is right in the middle of it all. And here's the village I've lived in for the last 40 years, which is Eastleek, just 16 miles away on the A6006. Eastleek is a Danish Viking name where leek means a stream. And in driving from Eastleek to Melton, you just know you're in Viking land. First of all, you come to this road sign. The BY name ending is Old Scandinavian for a village or settlement or farmstead. And the first element in Melton is also Viking. Then you come to this with Grimston, meaning the village or state of a man called Grim, and Old Dalby, meaning the old village or settlement in the valley. Then we come to Shoby, which is the farmstead or village of a man called Sigvalde or Sigvaldi. And could this be the site of Sigvald's old farm? The next signpost we come to is another one to Grimston, but also to Saxelby, which is the farmstead or village of a man called Saxulf. And then we come to Asforby, Asforby Valley and Asforby Hill, which possibly means the farmstead or village of a man called Asfroth. Then Welby, the farmstead or village of a man called Ali, and then past Brocklebys. And this is a modern farm centre and restaurant, not an old place name, but I've still included it because the BY name still captures that Viking spirit. Then Sysonby, the farmstead or village of a man called Sigstane. And on to Melton itself, where the first element is influenced by the old Scandinavian name Metal, meaning middle. Mowbray, the Mowbray Park comes from the name of a Norman. And finally to Thorpe End, where the Church of St John's is. Thorpe, meaning the outlying farmstead. So we are clearly in Viking land, or what was once Viking land. Let's now consider how the Danes got here in such large numbers. This is a map of England before the Danes arrived. The Anglo-Saxons, who came from a similar part of the world, that is North Germany, Angeln, which is a small region on the Baltic Sea coast of Schleswig-Holstein, and Jutland, and they started coming into what we now know as England at the end of the 5th century, settling in Mercia in the 6th century and becoming fully Christianized by the middle of the 7th century. And by AD 800, there were 7 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms known as the Heptarchy, but they're often fighting and scrapping against each other, and also with the surrounding Welsh and Scots, who were also fighting amongst themselves. And watching all this with interest from across the North Sea were the Danes and Norwegians. And the first recorded raid was by Norwegians from Hordaland in AD 789, when they arrived in Portland on the south coast, only to be greeted by what appears to be customs officers. A punch-up then ensued, which got out of control and ended up with the king's reeve being killed. Then the Norsemen headed away. Not long after, in AD 793, the Vikings invaded Lindisfarne in the northeast, plundering the treasure from the monastery and heading back. And this 9th century grave marker found at Lindisfarne captures the event. You can see seven Vikings brandishing their weapons. The raids continued throughout the 9th century, but by AD 865, there was a change from plundering portable treasure to a desire to capture land for settlement. And this was known as the Danish Great Army. And they landed in East Anglia and then moved north to take York in 866, then Nottingham, back to York to successfully defend against the English, then on to London in 872, setting up large camps in Torksey and Repton. In Repton, it was estimated to be about 5,000 people, including the families of the soldiers. Then the army divided, one lot going back to reinforce the Danes' control of York, then on to Tyne, and the rest taking Cambridge, and then having established control of this whole eastern area, they went on to try and capture the one remaining Anglo-Saxon kingdom, that was King Alfred's Wessex. And after initial successes, there were setbacks, and a truce was eventually made between Alfred and Guthrum, the king of the East Anglian Danes, which involved Guthrum's conversion to Christianity, and the country being split into 2. The lands to the east becoming the Danelaw with its own laws and customs. And from this distribution map of Scandinavian place names in England, it is clear where the southern boundary of the Danelaw was. And the Danelaw was split into 7 regions: Northumbria or York to the north, East Anglia to the south, and then the 5 boroughs: Derby, Nottingham, Leicester, Lincoln, and Stamford. And this started the Great Settlement period, and we can gauge how strong this settlement was from the density of the place names. See how dense they are? With the Wreake Valley, which is here, right in the thick of it. And it's worth pointing out here that the Vikings didn't write about themselves. It was not really until 200 or 300 years later, through people like the Icelander Snorri Sturluson. Instead, for this period, we have to rely largely on the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written with some bias from Wessex. What we don't hear about are the Norwegian Vikings who came, this lot here, who came into Britain by a different way, across the Scottish Isles, the Shetlands, Orkneys, Hebrides, down the Irish Sea to the Isle of Man, to Dublin, and then into the northwest of England. It's unlikely that these Norwegian Vikings form part of the Danelaw, the northern Danelaw. And it has to be remembered that the Norwegians and Danes were often enemies of each other. So the great settlement period of the Danes was around 877, and it was around then that they came into Leicestershire and to the Wreake Valley. They were coming by boat along the River Trent into the Soar and then the River Wreake. The Wreake is the only river in Leicestershire named by the Vikings and is an old Danish word meaning meandering river. And after Melton, marked by this white square, it becomes the River Eye. And this is a particularly windy bit of the Wreake near Hobie, and also here at Melton. So if the Wreake was like this in Viking times, then large longships would not have been suitable, but they would have come in probably with smaller boats like these bearings. These are these are ones at the Oslo Ship Museum, the Skip Huset, which were found with the Gokstad ship, and this is a more recently built one, and some may have had sails. Now, there are no written records about the settlements, but the names of the places tells us a lot about the people who were here. Rearsby preserves the old Scandinavian name of Reither, Thrustington, Torstein. Hobie doesn't contain a person's name, but means the settlement at the headline. And we have Brock at Brooksby, another Reither at Rotherby, possibly the same guy. Grimston is interesting because it combines a Scandinavian personal name, Grim, with the Anglo-Saxon name for a settlement, Tun, which suggests this was once belonged to an Anglo-Saxon who was displaced by Grim. And these combinations of Scandinavian with English have become known as Grimston or Toten hybrids. And other instances where the Vikings would have changed a former English name is when they couldn't pronounce them. An example is Derby. The former Anglo-Saxon word is Northworthy or Northworthy, which they struggle with, so it became Derby. Another example is Whitby in North Yorkshire, where the Old English name was Threnshell. So that was changed. And don't forget, the Vikings, particularly the Danes, came from the same part of the world as the Anglo-Saxons, just a few hundred years later. So the language would have been similar and mostly comprehensible. As we've heard, Asforby probably preserves the name Asproth. Kirby means settlement at the church. The Bellows part comes later from a Norman. Saxulf, as we heard, gives his name to Saxelby, and Sigvald to Shoby. Thorpe means outlying settlement, and again the Arnold bit comes later through a Norman. And Ab Kettleby, to the north of Melton, preserves Shettle, as does another Kettleby, I Kettleby, to the east of Melton. And there are two places of particular interest. The first is Saxby, to the east of Melton, on the way to Rutland, which may mean the settlement or village of the Saxons. The fact that the Anglo-Saxons have a specific place referring to them suggests their overall contribution to the local population was probably not that great. And Frisby means the settlement or village of people from Frisia, and indicates Frisians came over with a great army and warranted their own village. And perhaps significantly and most interestingly, there's evidence for a thing site at the boundary of Rotherby with Frisby. Now, by thing, we don't mean like the thing in the old TV series, The Addams Family, where this hand comes out of a box to answer the phone. Thing in Scandinavian means place of assembly. So it's where the Viking people of the Wreake Valley would have met to discuss items of law and community issues, including the power to outlaw people. And appearing in old charterries for both Rotherby and Frisby are these names: is Thingo in 1200, Tinge Hill in 1612 and 1625, Thing Hill in 1674 and Ting Hill in 1680. And this was picked up by Borry Cox 20 years ago in his superb 9-volume Place Names of Leicestershire series. And the name comes from the Old Norse Thing Haug or Thing Haug, Assembly Hill. But where is it, or where was it? Well, this is the Ordnance Survey map, and that picture we just seen was taken looking from here up to the hill, which is an elevation of about 104 feet, not far from a monument now known as the Stump Cross. This wasn't there then known, of course, in Viking times. Rotherby is here, Frisby is here, and here's Rotherby Lodge and Frisby Range. So it would appear to fit the criteria for a thing site with a dimple in the landscape and close to a road or track and river connections. But this is just an idea. And Mark Orridge, in the discussion that followed, pointed out another potential place nearer Frisby. And it was agreed for joint further action to investigate this further. The thing speaker or lagmadr, the law speaker, would address the thingmen and thingwomen women either by standing at the top of the hill or haug, or where he could make himself heard, or from the more sheltered area near the bottom, with people sat or standing on the sides looking down, as depicted in this drawing by Krogh of a meeting of a Swedish thing. There are other examples of things in England. This is Thingwall on Wirral, Thingwall, assembly means assembly field, and there's another one on the other side of the Mersey near Ken Dodd's old Jambutty mines at Knotty Hash, and another Thinghaug site being researched in Sherwood Forest. And elsewhere, of course, there's Tynwald in the Isle of Man, but perhaps the most famous is Thingvellir in Iceland, as captured in this painting by W.G. Collingwood, which used to be the site of the Althing, their central parliament, until the end of the 18th century when it moved to Reykjavik. And in Oslo, Norway, we have the Storting as their parliament. Stor is an Old Norse name meaning big or great, so Storting is the great parliament. And to the Vikings, the Thing site was a site of their power and self-determination. So this would have been a very important place for the people of this area. And who knows, all these people here may have been some of those early Thing men or Thing people. And if we stay with Frisby and look at some of the field and minor names in the area, we see lots of Scandinavian elements appearing. And this is true across the whole area. For example, bottom car, top car, car paddock, le car. These names record the Old Scandinavian shar, which means brushwood in a marshy area. Milholm and leholm, these preserve the Old Scandinavian holm, which means a patch or island of dry land in a marshy area, which is not surprising because it's on the banks of the bank of the Ree. Then there's Dimsdale and Kirby Debdale. This preserves Old Scandinavian dal, which means a valley, and Kirkja, which means church. Harbakdijk and Little Beck preserve the Old Scandinavian beck, which means a stream, and little, which means little. Melton Gate, King Hill Gate, preserve the Old Scandinavian gata, which means a track, a street, way, road. And Toftsikker preserves Toft, which means a small farmstead, a homestead, and Seek, which means to seep. Then there's Frisby How, which preserves, again, Old Scandinavian haug, hill, mound, and Witterswong. Witterswong, Old Danish wither, or Old Norse vidar, and Vang, which means way. So Withers, way. And I think it's fair to say that the Vikings coming in seem to be content to take the lower ground along the valley of the Wreake, whereas the earlier English settlements, we think they were earlier, tended to go on the higher ground. So they settled in the valley. It wasn't so bad here because it was quite fertile with the lias and boulder clay areas. And this geological map of the area comes from Ken Cameron in 1965. Moving a bit away from the Wreake Valley, firstly northwards to Framland, and we encounter this signpost with all these Scandinavian names. Garthor, meaning the outlying farmstead in a triangle of land. Then there's Beskeby, the village or settlement of Berg Shalda, and it's also the source of the River Eye, and hence the Wreake. Then there's Stonesby with Stoffen, and Sproston with Sprock. And there's just two others I want to mention from elsewhere in the county. There's Scraptoft, which is south from Framland, and that preserves Scrappy. And towards the west of the county, we have Thurcaston, because that preserves Thor Shettle. And the reason why I mentioned that was because of some important finds that were made there not long ago. Now, Sproston has this magnificent Anglo-Scandinavian influenced cross here in the churchyard of the Church of St. Bartholomew's. Now, this cross wasn't always situated here, and in fact, it seems to have been used as a bridge across a small tributary or stream coming from the Eye or the Wreake. The back face here has been completely worn away. And the wheelhead is characteristically Anglo-Saxon, where the arms of the cross cross over the wheel, as opposed to the Hiberno-Norse ring-headed crosses in the north of England, in Yorkshire, North Lancashire, and the Wirral, where they don't. Although the carvings are distinctively Scandinavian, with this interlacing and weaving on this side. You can see these circles here. And on the front side of the heavily weathered, eroded cross, at the top, there is a crow, which is supposed to be the crow of John the Evangelist. And then at the bottom, there's this beast shape. It looks like a wolf with a long tail, which continues onto this sort of interlacing pattern. So you've got a mixture of Christianity here and secularism. So mixture of Anglo-Saxon and of Scandinavian. And it's fair to say this is the only example of a Scandinavian cross in the whole county. And this moves us nicely onto the metal finds and the great work of the metal detector enthusiasts, with the many finds recorded under the Portable Antiquity Scheme, the PAS. In the past, people making finds would be reticent to coming forward, but the PAS protects the museums and the discoverers, in that if his or her find is deemed as treasure and needs to be given to a museum, then appropriate financial compensation is provided. And if not, then he or she is allowed to keep it, but the find is properly recorded and photographed and catalogued. And this map of Roderick Dale shows the distribution of Anglo-Scandinavian finds, with a strong concentration in the Wreake Valley again. And many of the finds are in the local museums, for example, at Charnwood in Loughborough, and in the museum at Melton Mowbray. And these are some of the Scandinavian brooches found in the area. This is the Danish border style in this one here. This is a copper alloy disc brooch found at Cottington, where the River Wreake starts or Wreake ends in the River Soar. And this cusp shape is characteristic of Scandinavians. And the same is with this later, again, Danish gelling style brooch found at Melton. Now, both show signs of having been gilded. You can see the gilding here, and perhaps more clearly here. So these belong to ordinary people who couldn't afford gold brooches, but still wanted them to look nice. And this at the bottom here is a trefoil brooch, which is popular amongst Scandinavian women, and women wanting to look Scandinavian. And this was found near Loughborough. These are two more copper alloy disc brooches, one found between Burton-on-the-Wolds and Derby, and another at the other end of the county at Goby. Pendants would also have been popular, and these are two Thor's hammer pendants, one found at Thurkeston and the other at Markfield. Now, the Vikings would have been largely Christian when they arrived here, so these pendants may have been used as a sort of social symbol to denote we are Scandinavian sort of thing. Or since they had only been recently converted to Christianity, maybe they were not taking any chances and kept these just in case, kept these symbols of their old religion. So hedging their bets. And we see this sort of hedging bets elsewhere on stone sculpture in the north and northwest of England. And also found at Thurkeston was a hoard of coins. Many were broken or chipped and from different currencies, which is consistent with the local Scandinavian communities using a bullion type of economy, where the weight of silver was used as opposed to the coinage themselves. And here's some more coins found locally, originating from a range of areas. This is a St Edmund memorial penny from East Anglia and found in Melton. This is a Danish silver skiath from Kirby Bellas, and a Northumbrian silver penny found near Rearsby. And this one that originates from York has been pecked, and you can see this on the reverse side, where someone has gone at it with the blade, presumably to check that it's genuine silver. And then there's this beautiful silver ingot, again part of the bullion economy, found at Breedon on the Hill. Many of the finds from the region are linked with horses, and it's not difficult to see why. This is what used to be the old Sandygate Tavern in Leicester, just round the corner, excuse me, from the station. And sadly, this pub, like so many, is closed now. But the old name for Sandygate, up to the 14th century, was the Skaith or the Skaith, which comes from the Old Norse Skaith, which means horse racetrack. And similar place names appear, for example, at Hesketh Bank near Southport, and also as two Hesketh's field names in Wirral, one at Irby and another at Thornton Hough. So they loved to race horses, but let's not forget, it was a tough time surviving in the Viking Age, but there would have been some time for pastimes, and racing horses may have been one. Now, stirrups appear later on in the Viking ages, and these are copper stirrup strap mounts found at Melton and Heckleton. And stirrups gave horse riders and fighters a huge advantage. This can be seen from this scene from the Bio tapestry. The Normans themselves, don't forget, were Scandinavian in origin. Riders could steady themselves on the stirrups whilst they hurled spears at opponents. Now, stirrups would not have been available to the Great Army, although we don't think so anyway, when they arrived 200 years before. So they would have used horses for traveling, but for fights, battles, and skirmishes were probably have dismounted and fought by foot. Here's another stirrup found at Kirby Bellers, and Wendy Scott. Wendy Scott has been Leicestershire Fines liaison officer of the PAS. There's a strap divider here found at Thornton, and a copper alloy bridle bit found at Bitterswell, and a copper alloy harness fitting found at Moseley, elsewhere in the county. And here are a couple of prick spurs. One found at Shalford here, and this one with Slavic roots found at Charwood. And this exotic piece shows the great trade links that the local Scandinavian community would have had with the outside world. And more evidence for these strong trading links comes from this beautiful decorative Carolingian mount found at Barrow on Soar. And these are mounts with Irish roots. This one here, a copper alloy mount found at Burton on the Wolds, and this beautiful silver gilt mount found near Melton, with 4 snake-like beasts with bulging eyes, very similar to one that appears in the Book of Kells. Now, these trading links with Ireland could possibly have come through York or Chester, both of which had strong links with the Viking kingdom of Dublin. It's a possibility, of course, they could have been originally nicked or stolen from monasteries and then passed on as stolen goods. We don't know. In terms of weapons, sword pommels have been found, the most local being from Skeffington. It's important to point out that in battles and skirmishes, swords, because of their expense, would have been rare, and the owners would have been relatively wealthy. Soldiers were generally armed with a shield and either a spear or an axe. This is a copper alloy key found at Peckleton. This object on the right, which looks rather like a bottle opener, is actually a copper alloy slide key found here at Melton. And Viking women were usually the family key holders, and they would have worn these sort of things on their belts. Okay, these are a couple of lead spindle whorls for working wool. One found at Heather, towards the west of the county, and this one nearer here at Frisbee on the Wreake. And also at Frisbee, this wonderful gaming piece, similar to the many found at Torksey in Lincolnshire, where the Great Army had one of their camps. And these pieces would have been used for Viking board games like Nefertafla or Jet, which you can now play online. And a similar gaming piece was found in Rutland. And also found at Rutland was another decorative stirrup mount. And these are other indications of Viking leisure pursuits. But most interesting from Rutland was this beautiful copper alloy brooch of possibly a Valkyrie, similar to this Valkyrie pendant found at Galgebakken in Denmark. And this is this Ernest style strap end, the style originating from the stave church at Ernest on the Sognefjord in Norway, which is found at Ridlington. This Norwegian style object found in Rutland is interesting, as although the Wreake was dominated by Danes, in Rutland there is evidence of Norwegian Vikings. And the place name Glaston preserves the name of the Norseman Glafr. So Glaston is the village or estate of a man called Glafr. And although Normanton, or what's left of it, this is the church right on the edge of Rutland Reservoir. So Normanton, although it's an old English name, it refers to the farmstead or village of the Northmen, the Norwegian Vikings. And of course, the Danes were here in Rutland too, with all the thought place names, preserving the names of Norsemen like Fridgester, Gunny, Ingolf or Injalde, Shettle, Scully, and Tolly. Although this ending is Thorpe, which is Danish, Bjornhelm, we think, is Anglo-Saxon. There's also a BY name in Huby. Now, Huby no longer exists, but there's still a Huby Lane in Rutland. Right, before we finish off with the DNA, just say that in terms of Leicester itself, there have been very few artifacts found from Leicester itself from the Viking Age, because it's now heavily built up, although it's known that Leicester was a town in the Viking Age. And there are probably many finds under the city's car parks, but it's unlikely that permission or the finances will be made available to excavate them, unless, of course, there's a suspicion the remains of another king under all the concrete. Anyway, so finally, Francis has asked me to say something about DNA, DNA ancestry, and how it might relate to this region, as I'm a biochemist at the University of Nottingham. I've done a lot of work with the geneticists at Leicester University on population ancestry. So, is this man a Viking? Or maybe this man? Well, if they have horns on their helmets, then definitely not, as contrary to Wagner and the Victorians, the Vikings didn't have horns on their helmets, although there is an example from the Osberg ship tapestries in Oslo of someone leading a procession with a helmet with horns. Okay, commercial DNA testing has become very popular, and there are many commercial providers available. As a personal tool, it can be interesting and is good for paternity tests and close ancestry, but with deep ancestry, it depends strongly on the databases being used. And this is why people get different results from different companies. So really, it only gives an idea at best. But the tests are relatively inexpensive. And if I was choosing, I'd possibly go for family tree DNA, or that's only my personal preference. The method, however, is much better as a tool for population ancestry, particularly if paternal and maternal ancestral markers are used. Now, most of our DNA is what we call chromosomal DNA, and we get half each from our parents. And all this DNA is mostly shuffled up generation after generation. However, there's part of the male Y chromosomal DNA, about 1% of his whole DNA, which is passed from generation to generation along the maternal line with little or no change, apart from mutations over hundreds or even thousands of years. There's also a small amount of our DNA called mitochondrial DNA. This is non-chromosomal mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down the maternal line from a mother to her son and daughter. Only the daughter can pass it on to the next generation. So these are two direct lines to our past, particularly if distributions of Y chromosome or mitochondrial groups, known as haplogroups, are compared. And the advantage of the Y chromosome DNA is that it's much larger, there's more DNA compared to mitochondrial DNA, so it's more resolving. And also because it can be linked to paternal surnames, which are also passed along the paternal line. And this formed the basis of the Viking genes in Northern England project between ourselves at Nottingham, the Department of Genetics at Leicester University, and University College London. It was in two parts. Part one, rural and West Lancashire. Part two, North Lancashire, Cumbria, and North Yorkshire. And then there was a possibility of a part three, which was the East Midlands. Now, volunteers had to have old surnames, not necessarily Viking surnames, but old surnames that were in a particular region prior to 1600 in order to take part. This is so we could get round the problem of large population movements since the time of the Industrial Revolution. And the reason why we started in the Northwest, because the Scandinavians who settled in these areas were generally of Norwegian origin rather than Danish. And it's very difficult delineating Danish DNA signatures from Anglo-Saxon, as they came from the same part of the world just 300 or so years later. Whereas Norwegian Y chromosomal DNA has different distribution patterns. And the first part was completed and published in 2008. And using the strict surname criteria was very successful, finding up to 50% of the DNA admixture of people with that surname criteria were Scandinavian in origin. From what time, we can't be certain, but it's consistent with a strong Viking presence. And the study involved a large number of collaborators, as you can see. That was led by Mark Jobling and Turi King from Leicester University and myself. This is a picture of us taken in Haugesund in Norway. And many people, that's where we were doing some testing over there. And many people think the statue is of the mermaid, but it's actually Marilyn Monroe, real name Marilyn Mortensen, I think, whose father came from Haugesund. And Mark, Turi, and myself provided a summary in this book from 2010. I'll say more about this in a second. The rest of the project was stopped by this man. It was interrupted by Leicester's sensational discovery of Richard III, the guy buried under the car park. And mitochondrial DNA analysis by the Leicester team proved crucial in that discovery. This meant that the focus was elsewhere and the East Midlands Viking project never got done. And there was that problem we talked about before with regards to the difficulty of distinguishing Anglo-Saxon from Danish ancestry. However, because of the domination of the Viking settlements in this region, and with the, as it seems now, Thing, it's highly likely they would have bequeathed a significant proportion of their DNA to people, particularly from old families in this region. And based on recent databases, such as from Wikipedia, I would think a significant proportion of men from around here have what's called the Dogger Bank or Germanic Y chromosome, known as R1b U106. And you can see this distribution from North Germany, Denmark, and Norway, and here. And maybe also this haplogroup known as I1, which is strong in Scandinavia. In terms of maternal DNA, although this is not as resolving, I would suspect many people from old families around here belong to maternal haplogroup H1. And that's basically it. That's the essence of the talk I gave to the Church of St. John's at Melton. If you've got any queries, then please drop us an email at steve.harding@nottingham.ac.uk. And if you're interested, please buy copies of these books here. Viking DNA, £10, with a wonderful foreword by Michael Wood. It's worth buying the book just for the foreword. And Science and the Vikings. This is a lecture I gave to the Largs Viking Festival some years ago. That's at £2.50. So special bargain prices are 10 quid and £2.50. So these were on sale last week, and we raised a bit of money for the appeal. They're still on sale, so either you can buy them from the church, or if you drop me an email, I could send you copies on. There's also this cardboard cutout Viking boat you can build, perhaps of the type that came down the Wreake, certainly small enough, with instructions in English and in Danish or Norwegian. And these are for £1. Again, they go to the appeal. And again, you can buy copies from the church on Thorpe End, Melton, or drop me a note. And Sue Bishop and myself have also produced this information sheet follow-up, which we were giving out at the end of the talk, which you can have for free. Again, just email us and we can post one order just to send you the PDF. Again, steve.harding@nottingham.ac.uk. So once again, thank you to Francis and all of the church and the Friends of St. John's and the amazing 100 or so people who attended for making this a fabulous evening. Thank you very much indeed, and watch this space in terms of developments with this this thing site. Okay, thank you.